Prepare to read The Galveston Hurricane of 1900. Notice and note. Quoted words. Genre study. Narrative nonfiction gives factual information by telling a true story about people, places, or events. Personal narratives tell about an important event in a real person's life. Authors of narrative nonfiction and personal narratives present events in sequential or chronological order. Narrative nonfiction tells about events from the past. Events are told from a second-hand point of view. Personal narratives give a first-hand account about an experience. The Galveston Hurricane of 1900. Galveston, Texas. Before the storm hit. In 1900, Galveston, Texas was a busy commercial port. It was also a popular place to vacation. The city sat just along the Gulf of Mexico. Warm waters lapped along its beaches. It would have been an ideal place to visit at the time. But Galveston was on a barrier island. Barrier islands can slow down storms approaching the mainland. They take the impact of the damaging winds and storm surge that accompany a hurricane. This was Galveston's fate. A few days before the Great Storm, scientists predicted the storm's path would go along the east coast of the United States. Unfortunately, for the 38,000 residents of Texas, the storm changed direction. On September 8, 1900, the hurricane struck. The storm's arrival. The ocean swelled. Waves rose 20 feet within hours. The storm surge easily flooded the island that Galveston called home. Wind speeds grew to 135 miles per hour. It was a Category 4 hurricane, the worst natural disaster in U.S. history. Buildings were shattered from the storm's force. They washed up near other collapsed buildings. People who hid in these structures were crushed. Other people drowned. The storm wiped out entire blocks and destroyed about 3,600 homes. About 8,000 people perished in the storm. Surge. If there is a surge of water, there is a sudden large increase in its depth. Perished. When people or animals perished, they died. Milton Elford was a young man living in Galveston with his mother, father, and a young nephew, Dwight. Milton was the only member of his family to survive the storm. He described his experience in a letter to his brothers in North Dakota. This portion of his letter begins as the rising water and intensity of the storm persuade the family to leave their home for a sturdier brick house across the street. We left our house about 4 o'clock, thinking we would be safer in a larger house, not dreaming that even that house would be washed away. We went across the street to a fine, large house, built on a brick foundation high off the ground. About 5, it grew worse and began to break up the fence, and the wreckage of other houses was coming against us. Galveston was a busy commercial port before the storm. Galveston after the storm. Approximately 3,600 homes were destroyed. 7. We had arranged that if the house showed signs of breaking up, I would take the lead and Pa would come next, with Dwight and Ma next. In this way, I could make a safe place to walk, as we would have to depend on floating debris for rafts. 8. There were about 15 or 16 in the house besides ourselves. They were confident the house would stand anything. If not for that, we would probably have left on the rafts before the house went down. We all gathered in one room. All at once the house went from its foundation, and the water came in waist deep, and we all made a break for the door, but could not get it open. We then smashed out the window, and I led the way. 9. I had only got part way out when the house fell on us. I was hit on the head with something, and it knocked me out and into the water head first. I do not know how long I was down, as I must have been stunned. I came up and got hold of some wreckage on the other side of the house. I could see one man on some wreckage to my left and another on my right. I went back to the door that we could not open. It was broke in, and I could go part way in, as one side of the ceiling was not within 4 or 5 feet, I think, of water. There was not a thing in sight. Debris. Debris is the piece of something that was broken or destroyed. I went back and got on the other side, but no one ever came up that I could see. We must all have gone down the same time, but I cannot tell why they did not come up. I then started to leave by partly running and swimming from one lot of debris to another. The street was full of tops and sides of houses, and the air was full of flying boards. I think I gained about a block on the debris in this way, and got in the shelter of some buildings, but they were fast going down, and I was afraid of getting buried. Just then, the part I was on started down the street, and I stuck my head and shoulders in an old tool chest that was lying on the debris that I was on. I could hardly hold this down on its side from being blown away, but that is what saved my life again. When the water went down about 3 a.m., I was about 5 blocks from where I started. My head was bruised, and legs and hands cut a little, which I did not find until Monday, and then I could hardly get my hat on. As soon as it was light enough, I went back to the location of the house, and not a sign of it could be found, and not a sign of any house within 2 blocks, where before there was scarcely a vacant lot. The storm shattered buildings and destroyed entire blocks of homes. After the storm. The storm passed in the early morning hours of the next day. The residents of Galveston began the task of cleaning up the wreckage and rebuilding the city. These efforts included raising the buildings up to 17 feet by pumping sand beneath the foundations. A sturdy seawall was built along the ocean front. But what was once the busiest seaport in Texas was forever changed. The devastating storm convinced shippers to move north to Houston. It took over a decade for Galveston to fully rebuild and become the thriving city it once was. The city of Galveston today.